Hey y'all, Becca here. I wanted to hop on and give you a quick disclaimer before you get started in today's episode. We are going to be discussing human trafficking, and with the nature of this topic, it may be more on the PG-13 level of discussion. So if you have any little ears listening on, this may be the time where you want to pause it and listen at a later time when they are not around, or you may just want to put in some headphones and listen that way. With that being said, let's get on with today's podcast. Hey, and welcome to the Grit and Wit Podcast, where we chat about living out Christianity while having fun and enjoying life in the process. With practical and laughable episodes, there's rarely a dull moment. So let's hang out. Let's have fun. I'm your host, Rebecca Caldwell. Welcome to the party. Hello there, friends, and welcome back. I'm so glad that you guys are here with me again today. It's a good day for a podcast. It's February. Welcome to the shortest month of the year, except for the fact that you do get an extra day because it is leap year. You get a whole extra day. So instead of 365, you got 366 this year. Take advantage. You get a whole extra day. It's 24 hours, friends. For all of you out there that have been hoping for more time, this is your year. You get a whole extra 24 hours. What are you going to do with it? I'm sure nothing, because it's not like you get an extra weekend. It's not like you get an extra day off, which is a super bummer. I feel as though leap year should be a dedicated holiday. Like, you don't have to work. Just everybody do what you want. Celebrate. It's only here every 4 years. You might as well. All right. So, and some of you probably watched the Super Bowl this past weekend, right? For all of you out there that are NFL fans, and let's be real, most people watch it even if you're not an NFL fan, even if your team is not playing. It's the biggest football game of the year. Honestly, I'm not a big NFL fan, so I didn't watch the game. I just didn't care. It was not important to me, and I just didn't have, there were no parties to go to or whatever, so I was just like, you know what, not into it. I also don't have cable, so I don't know how I would have watched it if I wanted to. Not for the commercials or the halftime show, which I've seen a little bit of controversy between amongst people with the halftime show. I haven't seen it, so I have no opinion. So no opinions on that, keeping all that to myself because I don't have any, really. So there's that. Instead of the Super Bowl, I hung out with my family and lost miserably in a game of Phase 10. Started off strong, y'all. And then came up way short and heavy on the points, all right? Question is, when you play Phase 10, do you keep points or no? Do you add up your points? And what does your point scale look like? So for us, like anything 10 and above is 10 points. Anything 9 and below is 5. Skips are 15. Wilds are 25, right? That's how I count them. I think that might be those might be the rules. I'm also I'm like a rule follower. You draw, you play, you discard. Drawing starts your hand, discarding ends your hand, and then you have to roll. So anyway, I'm the keeper of the rules usually when we play games. It's that, I don't know, I like to be bossy. It's a problem, but, well, maybe not a problem for everybody. Sometimes, I will say it depends on what it is. Sometimes I'm like, whatever, we can do whatever, I don't care. And then there are sometimes I care probably too much. So anyway, literally one hand, I got caught with 3 wilds. First off, how do you have 3 wilds and still not have your phase? I mean, why did that happen? That had to happen to me. And so 3 wilds, still couldn't make my phase, and ended up with all of the points. Seriously, one hand, I had 130 points. And I got caught again with a couple of wilds later on in the game. So I was a good 150 points ahead of everybody. So, and then everybody was on Phase 10 at the same time, which never happens. Who does that happen to? Okay. And there's just no hope unless I was to go out and I got my phase and nobody else did. But that didn't happen. Pretty sure I didn't even get the last one. Anyway, so as a lot of people traveled and geared up for the Super Bowl celebrations, those who work in the travel industry prepared in a different way. thankfully, most airlines, even some hotels, and those that work in like the mobile transportation, Lyfts, Ubers, taxis, people like that, have started training their staff to identify human trafficking. Now, a lot of these places have implemented training for this before this happens, but they just kind of highlight it during this time. Now, some people say that this is the biggest human trafficking day in the United States. Statistics don't necessarily back that up. But according to the Washington Times last year, in the 11 days leading up to and during the Super Bowl in Atlanta, the FBI arrested 169 people on trafficking charges, including 34 who were trying to engage in sexual acts with a minor. Now, that's big. That's a huge deal. Like, why is this happening? Why is this an issue? And I know that we took a really deep dive. Okay, I feel like maybe I should have prepared you for what was about to happen. But here's the thing, is that it does happen. Human trafficking is an epidemic, and we need to be aware that it is happening. Now, the Super Bowl, it maybe is not necessarily the biggest human trafficking day. There's probably not a specific day out there. Human trafficking happens in general. It is happening, and we need to be aware of it, right? So, according to an article from CNN.com written by Emanuela Grimberg and Christina Maxoris, the National Human Trafficking Hotline sees, quote-unquote, slight upticks in calls and reports during Super Bowl weekend, Polaris spokesman Brandon Bouchard said. But Polaris attributes the boost to heavier promotion of the hotline, not an increase in the prevalence of human trafficking on Super Bowl weekend. If someone calls during the Super Bowl weekend to report being trafficked, they were very likely being trafficked before that too, Bouchard said. Now, the FBI traditionally sees an uptick in online solicitation during large-scale events like the Super Bowl. Not just the Super Bowl, mind you, but like the Super Bowl. Any kind of large-scale events where you have a large number of people coming into a specific area. And so that comes from spokesman Kevin Rosen. The problem exists not just at major sporting events, but throughout the year in communities all around the country. Now, Freedom 9 Project reports that 17,500 people are trafficked into the United States. That does not include the people who are trafficked inside the United States. Does that make sense? This is talking about people being brought into the U.S. each year, and 81% of that number are exploited for sexual purposes. Now, unfortunately, human trafficking is notoriously underreported. And so even with all of the efforts of different human trafficking organizations, many people are still unaware this actually happens, specifically here in the United States. It's like we think our country is void of this happening because we're not a third world country, and so we don't have issues like that. But it is a huge issue, and it's okay. I'm gonna get into it, okay, in just a minute. Seriously though, people in the United States are unaware that this is happening. All right, so a few years ago, I participated in the Walk for Freedom. It's a global fundraising and awareness event hosted by the A21 campaign. So it's across the United States, or across the world actually, because they have locations across in different countries. And we wore these t-shirts that said, "Abolish slavery with every step." We had these yellow bandanas that covered our mouths with the names of actual human trafficking survivors on them. And we had cards to hand out that explained what we were doing and why we were doing it. And there were literally people who refused to take the cards. And they said to us, slavery does not exist. That's what the words that came out of their mouth. They were mad, friends, mad. And it broke my heart, because if we can't recognize that there's a problem, then we can't begin to fix it. We can't fight against an injustice if we deny that it exists. And the truth is, it's real. And it's happening. It's happening in your country. It's happening in your state. And not just in big cities. And not just at big sporting events. It's sneaky and it's undercover. And it doesn't always look like what you think it is going to look like. So I want to encourage you to educate yourself as to what it actually looks like. Because there are so many different forms and ways that it takes shape. According to Polaris Project, human trafficking is the business of stealing freedom for profit. It is a multi-billion-dollar criminal industry that denies freedom to 25 million people around the world. It's also the fastest growing criminal network. So let's talk about what are the different types of human trafficking. What does human trafficking look like? Now, for some, this is the most well-known, and that is sex trafficking. This is where a person is forced, deceived, or coerced to perform a commercial sex act. Now, this does not just look like the movie Taken, where the girls are taken to this high-end, dark, backdoor kind of sleazy high-end kind of thing where people have a ton of money to spend on these girls and they're drugged. And it does look like that sometimes. I will not say that that's not what it looks like. It does look like that sometimes, but sometimes it looks like these girls who are working at strip clubs. Sometimes it looks like prostitution. Girls work in the street corner or guys work in the corner because there are men prostitutes as well. It sometimes looks like a person selling themselves online. Sometimes it looks like somebody forced into pornography or coerced into that. And so there's so many different forms that this takes, and we should never ever assume that somebody is selling themselves for their own own enjoyment. Okay, that's rarely, if ever, the case. All right. So the second type is forced labor, and this is forcing a person to work in captivity for little or no pay. And this happens in America. I know that we think that it doesn't happen here, that we would not. There's no way there's forced labor, but there is. People are tricked. People are coerced. People are forced to work for little to no pay. The other kind is bonded labor, and this is forcing a person to work for low wages to pay back an impossible debt. This is where people maybe get themselves in a bind financially, and then somebody says, "Well, if you work for me, you pay me with your work," and they never are able to pay it back because they've bonded them into labor. The other kind is involuntary domestic servitude, and this is where you force a person to work and live in the same place for little or no pay. So this is where people live in your house, or maybe you have them work for whatever business that you own or whatever it might be, but you force them to work and live in the same place for little or no pay. And then the final type is child soldiers, forcing a child to participate in an armed force. Now, I don't believe this is an issue that we have in the United States, but this is an issue nonetheless. So how do people get trafficked? How does this even happen? And there are so many different methods to recruit victims. But here's how it kind of looks, okay? Known ways. And this comes from survivors that have been rescued through the A21 campaign, okay? Number one was a false job advertisement. Hey, we have this really great job opportunity for you. This is usually put out there for people who are living in poverty. We have this really great job opportunity. You can send money to your family. You'll be able to take care of yourself. And they lure them in with this false job advertisement. Number two, people are sold by their family. People are sold by their family. You would be surprised the kind of wickedness that is out there, but people can be sold by their family. If not by their parents, then by a cousin or by whoever, right? Somebody in your family, though. Number three, a false romantic relationship. So a guy kind of gets your attention or a girl kind of gets your attention. It doesn't matter. There are girls out there who were involved in human trafficking as well. So don't be surprised by that. But this false romantic relationship, and then they kind of get you to where your heart's all in, and they change things up on you. Abduction is one where they're literally stolen. Trafficked by a friend. Now, they have actually people who pretend to be your friend. They befriend you, and then they are trafficked by their friends, and then false immigration. And so there's so many different ways and types of human trafficking. Okay, friends, let's debunk some myths. Now, the most pervasive myth about human trafficking is that it always or often involves kidnapping or physically forcing someone into a situation. In reality, most traffickers use psychological means such as tricking, defrauding, manipulating, or threatening victims into providing commercial sex or exploitative labor. So, not everybody's gonna ride by and throw you in a van, okay? Not everybody is going to kidnap you or kidnap your kid. Sometimes they're gonna trick them, they're gonna manipulate them. And so that is why it is so important to make sure you understand who you're befriending, who you're hanging out with, that kind of thing. It's not always going to be a forced, violent kind of crime. The next myth we're going to talk about is traffickers target victims they don't know. That's actually not true. A lot of the victims are trafficked by family or friends, which we talked about. The next myth I want to talk about is only women and girls can be victims and survivors of trafficking. But one study estimates that as many as half of sex trafficking victims and survivors are male. Advocates believe that percentage may have been even higher, but that male victims are far less likely to be identified. Next myth, human trafficking only happens in illegal or underground industries. But human trafficking cases have been reported and prosecuted in industries including restaurants, cleaning services, construction, factories, and more. Next myth. People being trafficked are physically unable to leave their situations, locked in, held against their will. That is sometimes the case. More often, however, people in trafficking situations stay for reasons that are more complicated. Some lack the basic necessities to physically get out, such as transportation or a safe place to live. Some are afraid for their safety. Some have been so effectively manipulated that they do not identify at that point as being under the control of another person. Next myth, labor trafficking is only primarily a problem in developing countries, but labor trafficking occurs in the United States and other developed countries, but is reported at lower rates than sex trafficking. Next myth, people in active trafficking situations always want help getting out. But every trafficking situation is unique, and self-identification as a trafficking victim or survivor happens along a continuum. Fear, isolation, guilt, shame, misplaced loyalty, and expert manipulation are among the many factors that may keep a person from seeking help or identifying as a victim, even if they are, in fact, being actively trafficked. All right, guys, I know that was a lot of information to take in, especially for those that were just completely unaware that this was even a thing. And I do apologize for the heavier kind of podcast episode today, but we do need to be aware. We do need to know what's happening. And if you want to know what's happening specifically in your state, you can actually go to polarisproject.org. They have a whole map of the United States where you can see what your state looks like, where the hot spots are in your state as far as trafficking goes, what type of trafficking has been reported. So they are responsible for the national hotline, and so they have a lot of statistics. They have a lot of information. You can actually help by donating to the polarisproject.org. Another campaign that another anti-human trafficking organization that I support is the A21 campaign. They are located across the world. Actually, they're in multiple countries. They have multiple outlets. They do their best to raise awareness. They have school programs. So for any of my educators out there, if you can get that information into your schools to make these kids aware, because the more awareness we bring, the more prevention happens, right? We want to prevent human trafficking from ever happening. We want to give resources to those that need to be rescued. We want to make sure that traffickers are being prosecuted. And so if you need to know how to be involved, you can check out a21.org and get involved there. There are so many anti-human trafficking organizations out there. So find the one that you want to be involved in and get involved, whether it's monetary donations, raising awareness, doing whatever you can do. Being on the lookout, right? Go Google like how to cite human trafficking, how to look for people who might be held, against their will, looking for these kind of signs, especially if you are in the travel industry or in the hotel industry, whatever it might be. Make sure that you are doing your part to bring awareness and prevention. and let's do what we can to be a part of the rescue efforts as well, right? There's statistics show that only about 1% of those human trafficking victims are ever rescued, and I want to see that number change. I would love for that statistic to shift the other direction, that we could say 99% have been rescued, and we're going after the one, right? So let's pray. Let's be vigilant in doing what we can do to come against this heinous crime, and let's see the statistics shift in favor of the good fight. Yeah. So let's pray. Let's do our part to fight against this injustice. So thank you guys so much for listening. I do want to let you in on some goodness that is coming your way. I'm going to start releasing at least every other Friday. Is going to be a fun with friends episode. There's going to be zero agenda, zero, like, no seriousness, just hanging out, having fun, just nonsense. And so my BFF, my hubby, Trey, is going to be on my first episode, so make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss it. It's coming out Friday. Fun with Friends episode here on the Grit and Wit podcast. Thank you guys so much for listening. Share this with a friend because sharing is caring. Leave a rating and review over on Apple Podcasts. Make sure that you are hitting that like button if you're listening on YouTube. I also want to say I've been having some issues getting the podcast to YouTube. Last week's episode never made it over there because I've just been having some connection issues with that. So I do apologize, praying that this all works out and that this goes out there to YouTube and gets there. I'm going to link in the show notes all these different resources that I pulled from and the different organizations that you can get involved with in order to fight against human trafficking. Okay. Well, that's it. If you want to join my patron team, if you want to join the insiders, you can head on over to patreon.com/gritandwit. That's patreon.com/gritandwit. And as always, I'll talk to you next week, friends. See you then.